I've got a new list on the list of reasons why you should listen to this guy. Apparently, there's an ad running on Air America that describes me as a new gladiator for the progressive movement. And my wife listened to it and said, "Now you really need to lose some weight." Okay. So. Last time I had a book out, it was largely a collection of columns, and it was written in what I still think of as the darkest days of recent years. It was a period. The book came out in 2003. It was written. The various entries in it were mostly written in 2002 and in 2003, which was I assume for many people in this room, certainly for me, it was a kind of a nightmarish period. One of those nightmares where you're screaming and no one can hear you, which is particularly peculiar when you're writing twice a week on the op-ed page of the New York Times. But even so, it didn't seem like anything was getting through. To some extent, that nightmare has lifted. The acoustics in here are really interesting. It's all right. I'll save. I'm sorry. It is really strange because of the echoing. By the way, the best news source truly for these past 7 years has in fact been The Onion, and my favorite of all the Onion stories was the one that explained everything, that basically Dick Cheney had been using the White House intercom system to talk to George Bush, pretending to be the voice of God. And that's what this room is making me think of right now. Sorry. Okay. So let me get back to the thing. All right. Things have lifted some. There's clearly a lot more hope. And actually, this new book, The Conscience of a Liberal, is remarkably optimistic at the end for me. So much so that friends are asking if I'm feeling quite all right. So I'll try to talk about the reasons for that optimism and also the reasons to be really worried about the outlook. But mostly, we have 15 long months of this administration to go. By no means assured that we're going to have a good administration to follow, but it does seem that we need to look beyond. We need to get past what happened, and we need to figure out where we can be going from here. But in order to understand that, we need to understand how we got here in the first place. So a large part of Conscience of a Liberal is about what brought us to this nightmare that we all felt we were living in for several years, and that turns out that when you look at that history, there are some reasons for guarded optimism, for thinking that we may be able to turn this around, but not necessarily. So before I get to the future, let me tell you what I think we need to know about the past. Now, there are, from my point of view, two great puzzles in what happened to America over the past several decades. One of them is economic. It's the puzzle of why it is that we've come to enter a second Gilded Age. What happened to the middle-class society? I'm a baby boomer. What happened to the middle-class society that baby boomers grew up in, the middle-class society of post-war America? How is it that inequality has increased as much as it has? And the second puzzle is political. How is it that, far from doing something to mitigate this movement into a second Gilded Age, in fact, the political system has egged it on, has, in fact, as I'll explain in a little bit, largely been responsible for the creation of a second Gilded Age. We're supposed to be a democracy. Shouldn't changes in economic trends that hurt most people and benefit only a small number of people evoke a reaction, and not a reaction of approval and encouragement? So those are the two great puzzles, and let me talk first about the economics. So, all right, I'm saying second Gilded Age, and people tend to think, well, that's exaggeration, it's hyperbole, it's a metaphor. It's none of that. And the cold, hard numbers tell you that it's, in fact, not at all an exaggeration. Right now, the inequality of incomes in the United States is approximately as great as it was. Actually, almost exactly matches the numbers from the 1920s. And there, as far as we can tell, the 1920s were not really that different from the 1890s. So, in fact, when we say we're in the second Gilded Age, that's literally true. We are fully back to levels of inequality as great. You can see it, not just in the statistics, but, for example, Greenwich, Connecticut was like the North Shore of Long Island, which is near where I grew up. But Greenwich, Connecticut was one of the great places of robber baron mansions. There were giant mansions in Greenwich, Connecticut built during the Gilded Age. And during the post-war era, many of them were converted into nursing homes. Basically, no one could afford to maintain houses like that in the America I thought I was living in. In recent years, people, mostly hedge fund managers, have been buying up those Gilded Age mansions in Greenwich, and in many cases tearing them down to build bigger mansions. So we are, it really has happened. We really are back to the full Gilded Age. This has some pretty serious consequences. In a way, the least of those consequences, but very important, is that most Americans are not sharing in economic progress, or sharing very little in it. There is a real debate, a complex debate among economists about whether the typical family is better off now than it was in the early 1970s. By some measures, income adjusted for inflation is up a little bit, but that's entirely because more working spouses. So how much of that is a real gain and how much of it is just people working harder? Then you can go through other things. Some things, there were no DVD players in 1973. There were, but on another hand, it was easier to get to feel that your children were getting a decent education in 1973. The inequality in school districts has increased greatly. You can put it around. The answer is not important, actually. What's amazing is that we're having that debate. The fact that it's even debatable whether the typical family has made any gains over the past 35 years is incredible, because think of what America was like in 1973. Think of what the economy was like. No personal computers, no internet, no fax machines except very expensive things that were used by news organizations. No barcode scanners in the supermarkets. Freighters were unloaded by guys holding big bags of stuff. No freight containerization. We're an enormously richer country, enormously more productive country than we were 35 years ago. Yet we're not sure that the typical family has gained anything. And the reason, of course, is that all or nearly all of the gains went to a few people at the top. Now, who are these people? There's a widespread tendency to say, well, it's all about education. And it's people with good educations who've done well, and people without have not. Which turns out to be not entirely wrong, but mostly wrong. That is, it is true that people with college educations have done better than people with only a high school degree. And it's a significant difference. But the really big gains have come from only a small number of people. It's not that your typical college-educated or even your typical postgraduate education person has done really, really well. In fact, even people with postgraduate degrees have done less well in the past 35 years than the typical person did in the previous 35 years. The real gains are very much at the top. And I could give you statistics on the soaring incomes of the top 1%, or the top 1/10%. By the way, top 1% is $350,000 a year up. Top 1/10% is about 1 million a year up. So those are the groups that have really done well, especially that top 1/10%.